Tervetuloa. I wish you all welcome to Finnish National Defense University Annual Russia Seminar. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Simo Pesu and the team leader of Russia Studies team on the Department of Warfare. On the background, you can see our organizing team. Katri Pynnöniemi and Pentti Forsström will host and lead us through the discussions to Finnish National during today Annual Russia Seminar and the evening session. I wish the evening session offer decent working hours for participants outside the Europe. We have a great hope that you attendees will find it similarly workable. Very warmly, I greet our distinguished speakers. We highly appreciate that you found the time for our venue and audience to share your thoughts on Russian security and military thinking. We organizers have a humble wish to see our Russian colleagues, academics, in this venue too in future. Political spin is not very interesting for us, but serious discussion on security and military thinking is essential. Concerning today's arrangements, I ask you to identify yourself and your affiliation clearly in your question or comment. I thank you beforehand on behalf of our hosts, Katri and Pentti. And you, National Defense University YouTube subscribers, please direct your questions with email indicated in the invitation pages, and we will direct it to the host. Talks and discussions will be mainly available in YouTube channel after seminar, but today you have to listen carefully. Arash Pashankhalou's talk on realism and fear, due to it is available only live. And finally, you can consider opinions expressed by speakers to be individual unless indicated otherwise. And next, I will invite our research director, Dr. Hannu Kari, to speak from National Defense University behalf. So, Dr. Kari, floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear fellow scientists, when speaking about the role of university, the research is considered to be number one. According to the legislation in Finland, there are three main tasks for the universities: research, education, and interaction with the society. That applies also for our National Defense University. When speaking about research, it is, like I said, it's supposed to be the main task. What type of research we are doing, basic or fundamental research, applied research, and so on, or we can speak about research timeframes, past, today, and future. When speaking about the National Defense University strategy, we have two main goals for research: understanding and providing knowledge on the changing character of war, and also understanding and being capable of studying Russian. So this seminar fits very well on the research, this theme of this seminar, understanding Russia more. When doing research, we can say that, first of all, we need to understand the future challenges, what we are facing. Then we should also discuss about what is our role in the future as a defense forces, as a society, part of the society. And the third thing is, how shall we provide and ensure our role? So we will have a strong link for the education also. In the research modern days, we are talking about open sciences and even open data. So instead of keeping our information just by ourselves, we should be sharing our research and knowledge with the others. So no barriers for sharing the information. that should be the objectives, not only for the research results and knowledge, but even with the data. The second task what the universities are having is the education. It shall be based on the research, not only our own research, but all research of all the others also. In addition to that, our National Defense University has addition, the education shall be based also with the best practices. So we have a combination of the research and best practices for education. And the idea for the education is, of course, that we are ensuring also the next generations, making sure that we have also in the future capabilities of doing all our tasks. The third item for the university's role is interaction with society. I would call it expertise. And I'm challenging you. Typically, like I said, the research is supposed to be the first one, but I'm challenging your thinking and asking, is the expertise task number one, the most important one? The research is generating new information and knowledge. The education is providing sustainability or continuity and next generation of researchers and teachers. But with interaction of the society, we are utilizing our knowledge. We are helping the decision makers to make good decisions. Thus, we should not, our research question should not be that where are we going and why, but we should ask the question, where do we want to go and how we are doing it, and helping the decision makers of making good decisions. So, if I compare sharing material or information, if I'm sharing my money or food with you, I have less for myself. But when I'm sharing my information and knowledge with you, everybody gains. So I wish with my speech for you a fruitful seminar and share your knowledge. Have an interesting days. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katri Pentti and welcome to our first this day's keynote speech that will be given by Arash Pashankhalou from Sweden. He is an associate professor in war studies at the Swedish Defense University. His work has appeared in journals International Relations, Defense Studies, International Politics, and the Washington Quarterly, Journal of International Political Theory and Cooperation and Conflict. And Walgrave published his latest monograph, Realism and Fear in International Relations, Morgenthau, Waltz, and Mearsheimer Reconsidered. And I have the book here, and I was very pleased, and I think it's a really interesting book, and we would very much like to hear your views on deterrence and the fear in international relations. So, Arash, floor is yours.
For us to move on in the program, and I'm happy to introduce our next speaker from Lithuania. He's Daivis Petraitis, who is serving as a chief advisor in the International Relations and Operations Group at the Ministry of Defense of Lithuania. He started his service in Lithuanian Armed Forces in Civil Defense and Rescue Forces back in the 90s. His last military assignments were at the Deputy National Military Representative at the SHAPE and Chief of Information Analysis in J2 Defense Staff of Lithuanian MOD. After his retirement, he works in the MOD in the field of international affairs, mostly dealing with non-NATO and non-EU countries and arms control issues. He's holding a master's degree in international security and economic policy. And his title of his presentation is Centralized Military Approach, Russian General Staff as a Recent Russian Military Philosophy. Daivis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I hope you will see in a couple of seconds my presentation on the screen. I hope you see it. And before I start, at first, let's tell me you a couple of things. The first one, despite being mentioned that I am coming from the Ministry of Defense, here I would speak from my personal capacity. The second one, that everything you will see here comes from the open source, so there are no classified information here. And the topic of my short lecture would be presenting Russian General Staff. And why Russian General Staff? Because, as previous speaker said, when people guide own behavior based on emotions, sometimes they do not rational things. And he said that those who are emotionally flat are able to go and take risky decisions and to succeed. So I totally agree with that, and I think this wisdom was understood a number of years ago. So when we talk about military, there are also a type of military culture which appreciates this logics and rationale and says no to all emotions, especially while you're performing your actions. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to present Russian General Staff, staff culture, which is forgotten in the West or maybe forbidden. It also could be true because the Russian General Staff was forbidden by Versailles Treaty after the First World War. And after the Second World War, the chiefs of General Staff were sentenced in the Nuremberg Tribunal. So Russia remains among those few countries which still keep that system. I will explain a little bit about General Staff service, philosophy and principles, how we differ compared to those who are in the West. And I also present you with my thoughts about what we are doing in getting Russia stronger and able to stand against all the challenges it has. So as I said, Russian General Staff came to Russia almost 200 years ago. He was brought by Tsar Paul I, the guy who at that time took his own nobility as being lazy, spoiled, and not able to perform perfectly for the country. And he realized that this Russian state and the Russian military is the best example how to run things properly and how to succeed. And at that time, those who know the history know that Russian state was quite an efficient state, able to win a lot of victories and succeed in the rough competition at that time. Since that, Russian military tradition got accepted in Russia and has been developed since that time. Here on the screen, you see the different institutions and the different names established in the Russian military, but all they are the same Russian General Staff type headquarters working following the same Russian cultures, principles, and philosophies. And when Soviet Union broke up, Russian Federation again inherited that system, and even more in 2013, when the changes were made in the national law on defense, the General Staff regained its power. It was lifted up, and despite the fact that officially it is a part of the Ministry of Defense, as you see, the status of the General Staff is approved by the President, and most importantly, the General Staff is tasked to prepare and implement the state defense plans. So actually, it becomes the most powerful institution because of, as you will see later, and you will hear later, Russia takes different approach to the war waging and all military attached things. So the General Staff becomes really, really important institution. So with your permission, allow me to elaborate a little bit about this Prussian General Staff. Because as I said, it's not very popular, it's quite forgotten. And today in the West, we prefer to stay with the different General Staff culture. So I will try to explain this difference using German Field Marshal Moltke the Elder, so-called four officers matrix. He said that all the officers, differently from at that time prevailing understanding that officers are only commanders or staff officers, he said that even commanders and staff officers could be different. So he divided the officers in two different categories based on initiative and intelligence. And he said that initiative and intelligence officer is the officer who is able to direct right things to happen. So both they are the high-level professionals, emotionally flat, stable, who are able to think, to design things, to put all the thoughts they have on the paper, and to persuade the others about this or that course of action being right. He also said that there are commanders who are smart but lazy. Those people are able to understand things, and they're able to take arguments, but they are just a little bit too lazy to work a lot to make those plans. So they are very good doers. They do the things, they implement the things the most effective way. And there are two other categories of officers. One of them being dumb and lazy, an ordinary staff officer who just knows his rules, his requirements, he performs what he is told, and this is a normal staff officer. And Moltke said that both officers are necessary and you have to maintain them. The biggest problem, according to Moltke, was the energetic and dumb officers. Those who make things happen, but usually those things are done in the wrong way. So Moltke said, those type of officers have to be destroyed. So as you see, he talked about a special group of officers who supposed to be captured all the time because those are real professionals. As you know, in today's headquarters, especially in the West, we don't stick to that matrix. We take officers only as commanders and as staff officers. So in such a case, to talk about a separate group of general staff officers, despite the fact that we have the name of general staff officers even in the West, is not right thing. In the West, we don't have the separate groups of officers so much emphasized and turned into the caste. But as I said, Russia remains different. It kept that system since all the times, as I see. And today there is a small, relatively small group of officers in the Russian military who belong to this military caste called General Staff Service. Because according to Russian understanding, according to that philosophy, there are general staff officers who are executive agents of the commander at each echelon, or commanders. And there are ordinary staff officers who just are both dumb and lazy, who are just performing the orders. According to Russian understanding, and according to Prussian understanding as well, because as I said, Russians inherited everything from the Prussian system, general staff officers must get a special additional training. They must be trained. They must be selected depending on the intelligence and other characteristics, personal characteristics they have. So Russians do that. They have a selectional process. I will talk about this a little bit later. And they do this general staff service officers training in General Staff Academy. Because this is the only academy, because it has the same system, all the graduates as a result, despite the service, because as you will see later, the academy trains not only the military, appreciate the same military or general staff traditions. They have the same values. They have the same operating procedures, so they easily understand each other without long talk. They could operate very, very efficiently. Briefly about the General Staff Academy. In Russia, General Staff Academy has a lot of different subsidiaries and institutions, but as a training facility, it has 3 main courses. The main commanders course for the high-level commanders, which lasts for 2 years, and students are selected usually at the colonel level. They join the academy for 2 years, and the most interesting thing that the training course includes so-called internships lasting from 3 to 6 months, but those internships are so-called field internships. That's why for those who are interested in military issues and topics, heard that some time ago, Russians had generals killed in Syria. Sometimes generals are killed in different situations. In some cases, those are generals sent to perform normal duties on a routine basis, but at the same time, it could be that those students, that there are those unlucky students who happen to be at the wrong place in the wrong time. The second course the General Staff Academy has is so-called specialist course for potential general staff officers, because general staff service includes not only generals. There are also officers who work in those headquarters, and those are, as I call them, pure general staff officers. And such officers exist, and they could progress in the military career, and we will see this in a few seconds. The third one course run in the General Staff Academy is so-called professional development course for militaries and, the most important thing, civilians. Since some years, high-level civilians, usually governors, the high-level federal managers, are sent to this course so they get familiar with this military philosophy, the way top military brass is operating, planning, and performing. The high-level commanders in Russian Federation are appointed only from the general staff officers, mostly the graduates from the main course. While they progress in the service, usually they rotate between high-level commanders and the positions in the different troops and staffs. Those are those lazy and smart guys who enjoy being as a commander, but at the same time, they are able and capable to implement those. Because, as I mentioned, the Russia keeping that tradition for quite a long time. In the Soviet time, of course, it was taken care by secret services in the West, in America especially. And after the end of the Cold War, a lot of, or let's say quite a number of classified, highly classified documents on Russian military, including general staff, they are declassified. So one of those was the document produced by CIA, declassified about 10 years ago, describing in details the Soviet general staff, its value, its role, everything it did at the time. At the same time, it was presented at that document, but it could be confirmed today if everyone takes or someone takes a look into the CVs of the commanders, what positions they followed, that, as I said, general staff officers occupy only certain positions. Here on the screen, for me not to talk, you see the positions usually the general staff officers are occupying. And as you see, the higher level of the military hierarchy position is, there are more and more positions open for the general staff officers, because in the general staff itself, even colonels or lieutenant colonels belong to the general staff service. When you go down and go to the tactical level, there are not at all general staff service officers at the company or battalion level. So this makes those officers different. And this means that it's not only the privilege, it's also an extra requirement applied to this general staff officer. Because, as I said, he or she has a power to be not only the officer, he is also an executive agent of his commander. Here on the bottom, you see that those extra requirements for general staff officers are being used today as well. They are getting improved, and the last change and last addition to those requirements was based on open sources introduced just a few years ago. As I said, at the tactical level, commanders are not general staff service officers. They are appointed from the ordinary staff officers, and they perform as a pool for the selection for the candidates to become the general staff service. So now let's take a short excursus into the side just to see, is it true what I was telling or is it not? Let's take the recent general staff, chiefs of general staff of Russian military. Those are General Gerasimov and General Makarov. If you look into their CVs, you will see that the majority of positions they perform their commanders' positions. They got training, the same training, 2 years course in the General Staff Academy, but they are those lazy and smart guys who were able to implement the directions to get things rightly done. They were not designers. And for those who are interested in the Russian military, recognizes that those two general staff chiefs are responsible for the Russian military reform. Makarov was working alongside Serdikov, and despite a lot of even experts thinking that Serdikov was stupid and ignorant, I personally don't think so. He did what he was supposed to do. His task was to break down the military machine, and he succeeded. The minister Shoigu got another chief of staff, also smart and a little bit lazy, but he was already oiling and smoothing and calibrating the new machine. So both chiefs of staffs belonging to the General Staff Service were commanders who implemented the design. But as I said, to prepare the design, you need especially dedicated officers. So who prepared that design? It was a General Baloyevsky, the chief of staff. But as you see through his CV, he held commander's positions only in the beginning of his career. So as you see, the guy who never held position of the regiment commander, or battalion commander, division commander, was able to make up to the highest level of the military career due to the only simple thing. He was very smart and very energetic. And he was given the task at a very difficult time for the country to design a new military. And he succeeded. So now getting a little bit more to the principles, which are slightly different compared to our taken in the West. And sometimes we tend to forget that. The Prussian General Staff mentality or philosophy says that maximum success in an operation and activity is achieved when the activity is divided into the stages and synchronized in the time. So this could be achieved only performing a detailed planning of any operation and activity. So in the Prussian General Staff and in the Russian General Staff, the General Staff officers do a lot of planning. But even Moltke at his time noticed that this is a very, very difficult situation. I beg your pardon for a second. Beg your pardon. So even Moltke noticed that even the brightest plans, even the best designed plans never survive the contact with the enemy. So he pointed out two of the biggest shortages of a Prussian General Staff system. To produce a lot of plans, it requires a hell of hours hard working. So human beings have to be real genius. And the more plans you produce, the more difficult it becomes to get those right people. The second one, because the exchange of information was slow, even the brightest plan, before delivered to the battlefield, gets already outdated. Situation is changing. So when the time flew, technologies came, the weapons became more sophisticated. Those two problems started to affect. What solution Russians found? They found the solution that technologies, which mostly caused the problems, could be a solution as well. Russian military assumes that in recent technologies allow to eliminate those two things because computers allow those smart people to design and analyze and evaluate as many situations as needed. And the system itself, based on new technologies, on digitalization, allows to affect communication speed. So you could pass enormous amounts of information and orders almost instantly. Keeping that in mind, General Staff designed a system how to manage and how to control Russian military. So they created a system consisting of structural part, of the communicational part or enablers part, consisting of communications and automated data systems, and also concepts which are made again following the same principles of Prussian General Staff. So this is again a not new thing. Before doing that, Russians analyzed quite a lot and studied these Western network-centric warfare theories. We realized that technologies help to implement those theories, and as I've already told, they designed that system. We have a structural part, this so-called National Defense Management Center. I will talk about it a little bit later. Is designed following the hierarchical swarming approach. When this enablers part, the spread of information, is designed on distributed swarming approach. And then the conceptual part, the commands and tactics and all the ideas spread in different military units are designed to be spread by orchestrated swarming approach. So those territories here implemented, and here you see the snapshot from...
Please, Daivis, excuse me, but we are running short of time, so...
Yes, I know, I need 5 more minutes with your permission. So this was implemented. What I want to emphasize that this National Defense Management Center now is moving outside. In the beginning, it was responsible to control only military. Now, as you see, it controls a lot of civilian institutions. So the General Staff philosophy is being spread outside the military. And to prove that, there are a couple of presidential documents signed, as you see, back in 2013, which authorize the military to do those things, to spread this military philosophy and mentality into the civilian part of the society and the state. So as you see, as soon as General Staff mentality passed through the forces and C2, now it became important to have the right people, because not not the military run the country, you have to have civilians running the country. So to do that, in 2019, the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, had a conference presenting those military General Staff ideas and philosophies to the civilians. The Tula region was selected as a pilot project, and they established the Civil Management Center, which is sort of the military pilot project in the state. Putin visited that center and approved the center and said that this was the right thing. So they got already the system established. What the General Staff is doing right now, it's taking care about civil federal management. I already said that the highest level officials have to be trained and are trained in the General Staff Academy, but General Staff Academy is not able to train all of them. So some years ago in Russia, it was so-called the Academy for the high-level civil officials established. And even more, a few years ago, in Russia, there were a couple of interesting projects initiated, so-called the Leaders of Russia. There they do the screening and accept applications from the wide majority of ordinary citizens. The selected ones go again from the screening, from the different competitions, as those normal lieutenants and captains in Russian military. At the end, they are selected and they go to this academy and they become the reserve officers in so-called presidential cadre pool. Another interesting thing showing that military is infiltrating the country is that the military started to rotate. It would be very difficult to imagine, let's say so, in the West having a general suddenly appointed to be a major of a big city. It's a normal thing in Russia. Here you see a couple of examples. As for example, Deputy Commander of National Guard suddenly became appointed as the acting head of the Dagestan Republic. What is going to be his next post? Nobody knows. Because another example, Metikov, General Metikov, who used to be the chief of special forces, suddenly became the presidential representative in the North Caucasus and again returned to serve into the military. So now you see the situation when the military assignments are going in line with the civilian ones. So this concludes my presentation explaining the difference of General Staff in Russia, the role it plays in Russia, and the consequences we might face if it succeeds. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Daivis Petraitis. This was a thorough presentation, but we ran out of time. So if you allow that we take all the questions in the discussion session for all of you.
Okay.
So we take the next speaker, which is already familiar to us all. He was also presenting last week a presentation on the deterrence research, and now Stephan de Spiegeleire, who is working as a defense and security analyst at the RAND Corporation for nearly 10 years, and in the meantime also in Germany and the Western European Union's Institute for Security Studies in France. And, but already for more than 15 years he has been working in Netherlands in current position as a principal scientist and a senior advisor, defense and security. He's also a teacher at the Webster University and lectures at military academies across the world. So no further introduction needed, I think, and I give the floor to Stephan de Spiegeleire, please.
Yeah, thank you. Are my slides up?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. And slides are on.
Okay, great, thank you. So for those of you who missed last week, let me just mention that this is part of a larger research effort that's actually funded by the United States Defense Department's Minerva Research Initiative, their basic science funding effort, as well as by the Carnegie Corporation of New York's effort to in this particular field. The names you see here are part of the team that worked on it. We fortunately also had last year, we had prepared for last year's presentation, so we're able to do a bit more. Let me also give a shout out to Andreas Heiner, who is the Chief Technology Officer of a small Finnish startup, and who played a very important role in this presentation as well. So last week, I suggested that what we have done over the past year and a half was to sort of submit the field of deterrence studies to an MRI scan. I talked about 4 different layers of the deterrence scholarship, deterrence as a whole in all different disciplines, not only human deterrence, but also biological deterrence, medical deterrence, all sorts of other things. Deterrence human, where it's really about humans trying to deter other human beings. And then specifically, of course, the international security literature on deterrence, and within that, the literature on Russia. So today, the presentation is really on the last 2, so only on international security and on Russia. Last week, we also focused mostly on technical issues. That is, how much does this field work together? How much is knowledge shared? How quickly is it shared? How much uncertainty is there? We pointed out that we're in a period of high entropy in our field, so things are changing quite rapidly. But today you want to dive into the substance or the content of these data sets. So what do they actually talk about? And how do these things change over time? The sources we've used for this are still the same sources that I pointed out last week. So bibliometric data sets, which only contain the metadata and not the full text of the article. But there's some very good data sets out there. And so you talk about a few thousands of articles when you're talking about international security, or a few hundreds to a few thousands. But when you're talking about the purely Russian literature, it's a much smaller subset, at least in the bibliometric databases. So what may be more useful for all of us is to look at the full text of documents. And there too, we collected a whole set of corpora. Those are sets of documents, both on international security as a whole, and which you see on the top of the slide, and international security on the bottom. So as you see on the whole, we have about 50,000 articles from the English literature on deterrence, and we have about 37,000 in the Russian literature. And that's from sources like Eastview Press, which is probably the largest, one of the best aggregators of military periodicals. It doesn't have all periodicals, but it really has most of military periodicals, a very good collection. Also a very good collection of Russian academic writings on these topics. Integrum is a very large database, which is also, they are both commercial data sets. But there you also have more media coverage, probably better selection of official sources. So all public statements of the Ministry of Defense, for instance, are in there. And then a couple of other sources we added that as well. So the corporate we worked with, and we'll show you here today, are really a Russian corpus of a little shy of 40,000 documents, and an English corpus a little shy of 50,000 documents. Let me also point out that most of that literature is not publicly available. So we looked at this in one of the big data sets, which is Lens. And so we found out that in the international security literature, there's only about 30% of academic publications that are widely available. So depending upon the access that researchers in this field have to these sources, they may or they may not be able to actually dive into some of these things that are out there. And given the, as I mentioned last week, still highly analog nature of this field, a lot of opportunities here are being missed. I want to highlight again a point I made last week, which is that most people, when they look for articles for or books on the topics they want to investigate, they go for precision. So they want to have the best books or articles on the particular topic that they're interested in. What they spend much less time on is to collect all relevant documents in that particular field. And so that's really what we tried out to do. So we really set out to pay a lot more attention to recall than just to precision, for the very simple reason that if you get recall, you get precision too. But if you have precision, you don't get recall. A lot of the work is increasingly being done by a new, very quickly developing field of artificial intelligence, which is called natural language processing. So as you see on the top right, it's sort of the intersection between computer science and especially artificial intelligence within that, and the field of linguistics. And that's sort of what NLP is all about. And you see next to that slide a couple of the very influential new language models, a lot of which are named after Muppet Show characters. So like BERT is Google's big breakthrough. By the way, almost everything you see on in this particular slide is of the last 2 years. So these are really recent, very big developments, which you use every day when you do a search on Google or when you speak on your mobile phone and ask for something and it translates it into text and goes off to find it. So a lot of these are Muppet characters. So Bert was a big one. And then from Bert, you get Roberta, you get Camembert for the French language. But so these are big language models, which are now, and only for a few years, context aware. So just like when we read a document, we also look at the context, these things do too. So this is interesting for us because we can more easily find the content that's relevant for us. If you search by keyword, if you look at the bottom left, you see what probably the distribution is of articles that are mostly used in the field. And so there's a bunch on the left that are cited by a lot of people or read by a lot of people. But then you have a very long tail, which is hard to retrieve, which people don't usually look at. And that's really where we can actually try to make a difference. And so we've now trained, as you see in the bottom right, a semi-supervised model that allows us to identify sentences within documents that really are about deterrence and also tell us the degree to which it deals with deterrence or not. So our research protocol on much of this is that we first collect and clean the corpus. Those are the figures I showed you before. We then identify the relevant excerpts. And in some of the work I will show you today, it's still mostly done in a manual way, but like I just suggested, we can increasingly do that with semi-supervised models and automated ways. And then we do three things with these excerpts. A, we code them manually. We do unsupervised NLP or text mining as it's sometimes used as called, and also semi-supervised analysis. In the manual strand, we first make coding schemes. And so we take an excerpt from a text that is on a topic that we're interested in. We look in our coding scheme, and then we apply the code to that segment of text. And by doing so, we can really start discovering findings that we probably would never have been able to discover without the tool. The unsupervised course of development or line of development really uses a number of very popular in the meanwhile in other fields, lots so in international security libraries, to, for instance, automatically detect topics in the text, automatically detect key noun phrases, so terms and how they change over time. And then finally, the semi-supervised track, which, we had to choose. We can't show everything in this presentation, so we've chosen to focus on the manual and the unsupervised tracks. On unsupervised, what you see here is because of what's on the screen here, I can actually read the top of it. But I think this is from Scopus. And so what the software program here is called SideSpace. It's a freely available software program, which anybody can download and play with. And so what it looks for here is these noun phrases. And some of them are single words, like deterrence you see somewhere in the middle, or sort of to the bottom, number 10, or sometimes 2 words like nuclear war, or 3 words like American foreign policy, or 4 words like Franco-British nuclear cooperation. So those are automatically extracted from the abstracts, the titles, and the keywords of the articles that you're looking at. And they're then clustered by which terms co-occur. And so what you see here is the ones in the middle are really at the heart of the debate. So for instance, nuclear weapons, number 1 is called cyber deterrence, but when we looked at it, it's actually more broad than that. Arms control. Other ones are more on the sides. If you look, for instance, number 16 on the top, American foreign policy. So you see it's a little bit more detached from the other clusters. It also shows the color. The color suggests how old it is. So the red parts of this graph are older clusters of terms, and the yellow ones are more recent ones. So for instance, if you look at the bottom left, you see piracy and terrorism, which is a somewhat newer addition to the overall knowledge landscape, if that's the way you want to call these graphs, than some of the other topics that are in there. You can then do a search on the topics you're interested in. So for instance, here we looked for any term that has the term Russia in it. And so you see Russia thought, you see Russia military doctrine, Dmitry Medvedev, Russian president. So all of these things you can then still drill down on to look what they're actually about. So if you see a new Russian military doctrine, what are the other terms that are around that? So for a researcher, of course, this allows us to really dig much more deeply into a much larger set of documents than we would be able to do if we just read the articles and tried to build models in our mind, because that's also what we do. What these models are doing are not different from what we do in our brain. except for we, of course, have still more knowledge that we can tap into than the machines so far do. You can look at things over time. So what you see here are the key topics in this particular data set. And you also see at what moment in time a particular term occurred within that cluster. So the first one is about strategic stability. And you see that in 2014, there's a cluster of terms that are related to Russia that occur there. So these are all visualizations of much larger sets of documents than we would usually consume and analyze in our work. This is what the interface looks like. So you see a similar cluster here. On the left, you see these noun phrases. So the most frequently occurring one here is nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence. I also made it a little bit bigger on the right there. And so you can drill down on all these things more deeply. And one of the most interesting elements of SiteSpace is what is called the cluster explorer. So on the top, you see the clusters with and you can select one. If you select one, you will see the documents in which that particular cluster is prevalent. On the right, you will see the keywords and how important they are. And then you can still generate typical sentences for that particular cluster. So if you're trying to make sense about what the whole thing is about, you just drill down to that particular part. You can also see the evolution of clusters over time. For instance, one of the clusters in this field was about, let's say, East Asia. And there are two dimensions to this cluster. The first one, as you see right next to the number 1 on top there, are things that are mostly related to East Asian security and especially North Korea. Whereas the other one, after the bar towards the right there, is more about Pakistan, India, and issues related to that. But what the system shows you is which terms were the most prevalent in this particular cluster early on. So the first occurrence of this cluster is in 1999, as you see there, and that's about Pakistan, India, test denuclearization. And if you look at the more recent stuff, it's really much more about North Korea and the Kargil War and nuclear states and things like that. Another really nice element that you can look at is what are the key terms that really are very bursty. That is, in a certain period, they certainly start occurring a lot more. And you see here, for instance, on the bottom, that both Russia, so in the period from 2006, from 2016 to today, Russia has again become to play a much more important role in these 2,312 terms that are actually occurring. And the cyber domain had a very big spike in 2017, 2018, but seems to have declined again a bit in this literature. We also could do this, and we have done this for the Russian data sets that are on this. But as you see on the bottom, they're much smaller. So you're only talking about 65 articles. And so whereas you can build these networks and visualize them and analyze them, of course, they're a lot less meaningful and deep than some of the English ones that we have. Since we're running behind time a bit, I'll sort of skip some of the slides so that we can still get to discussions. The second part is the unsupervised natural language processing of the full text. So what you've seen so far is a software program, SiteSpace, trying to make sense of the metadata of these articles. And here we're actually starting to dig in the real full text of these articles or books, but it's mostly articles in this case. And one of the things that you do is, for instance, an algorithm called, well, there's a couple of algorithms, but they all do what is called topic modeling. So they try to identify the main topics in a corpus. So to give an example, if you have a document that talks about a dog is an animal and dogs are loyal, and a cat is an animal and cats are evil, you know, it knows that these things are about animals. And the ones on the right are more about technology. So the algorithm just tries to reconstruct the topics that authors have decided to put into their publications and try to find out how important they are, how they change over time. So here you see one of the outcomes of the Russian corpus. So these are Russian articles in Russian, written in Russian, analyzed by Russian natural language processing algorithms. And they cover both Eastview Press, so the military literature and the academic literature, but also Integrum. And on the right here, you see some of the things for that. Let me see if I can show you some of this live. All right, so you see here, and this was interesting for us because we have Integrum in here. So most of us, if we would think about the Russian literature of deterrence, we would think about things like nuclear deterrence, the more strategic stability, the more philosophical part. But what that literature is often missing, as I already mentioned last week, is the reality, the empirical reality of the Russian use of deterrence. And so that's what this corpus nicely shows. And you see here, for instance, on the right, you see the most salient terms across the entire corpus. You see, for instance, that Ukraine is very high in that. Not something you would expect in the academic literature and the military literature, but you do find it back if you also look at newspapers, and those range from Rossiyska Gazeta all the way to Komsomolska Pravda to like, Nova Gazeta, the more liberal ones, but also magazines like, Kommersant Vlast or things like that. So it's really a broad set of literature. And so on the left, you see the main topics. So if you click on one, it will show you what the main topics are in these particular, what the terms are in these topics. So this is the biggest one. It has Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, Timoshenko, Yushchenko. So it's really a cluster about the post-Soviet states with a very sharp focus on the events in Ukraine. And if you look on the other side of the two-dimensional visualization here, you see things that have much more to do with Russia and the United States, strategic nuclear stuff. So it's essentially a visualization of the literature on this topic, which allows you to drill down and find out exactly what these things are about. So if I go back here in F5. So these are some of the main topics of the entire corpus. And as you see here, the most important topic is actually the one surrounding Ukraine, to some extent Belarus and Georgia a bit. Then you have a topic on nuclear deterrence per se, and then the general IR discussion. By the way, these are labels that we have given to the topics. So every topic can have tens of words, which we then as human sense makers have to take a look at and try to see what they're actually about. And you see another post-Soviet countries in there, which is more broadly, so not just Ukraine, but also other ones. So it allows us to identify some of the main topics in the corpus and also map them over time. The visualization for the mapping over time, we hope we would have ready by today, but we do not. We're fairly confident that it will be ready by the time we publish the paper. So these are some of the most salient topics in there, which I showed you before. Then we also did the same for just the academic and the military corpus. And by the way, we can also split that out so we can show what the military write about and the other one write about. Again, for the sake of time, let me shift to the last one I want to show you, which is about manual coding. And so here what we do, we take the text, we identify the relevant sentences, and we then have this, as you see on the right, a coding scheme, which we amply discuss. So the whole team annotates, every single code is at least looked over by one other person. We may change the code tree as we go along and have to go back, and then we have to go back and recode the ones we've done before. But ultimately, this generates some visualizations that we can try to make sense of and write up in our final publications. So the coding tree we use for deterrence, and actually for deterrence, we looked at two different things. Definitions of deterrence. So when somebody offers a definition on what deterrence is in this Russian literature, what are the main building blocks in that definition? And these building blocks are things like, what do we know about the deterror? And for instance, in terms of agency, is it a state or a group of states or non-state actors, non-subnational actors? On the bottom left, we see, for instance, the timing of the deterrent action. That is it the deterrence only pre-conflict, or can it also be intra-conflict? So all the important ingredients that people talk about when they talk about definition of deterrence are the ones that we've coded. And so, for instance, here you see the ones on the nature of deterrence. What could deterrence be? And to sort of already give away one of the sort of headlines is that we often talk about Russian deterrence, or for that matter, about Western deterrence. But the variance that we see within our language domains and also across our language domains is much higher than we think most people really recognize. And so that's a huge problem for us as analysts, because this is sort of the apples and oranges kinds of thing. So what do we have in common? So I think parsing the evidence that people have on deterrence based on the definitions that are used in articles is something that we haven't even started doing yet, but what this type of approach might allow us to do over the next couple of years. So what you see here, for instance, are the original terms that are used in, and on the right, you see the Russian literature. And we are now also doing the same thing for the English literature so that we'll be able to compare the two. And the English literature is only about 75% done, so these are not final results. But you already see some interesting dissimilarities here, for instance. So the English one is very much on things like strategy, concept, state of mind even. And in Russian, sposobnosti, so capabilities, You see capabilities is also on this side, but it's a bit less relevant than the other side. But the question still remains, what does we actually show? So here we show some visualizations. So here you see the amount of excerpts that have been coded in this entire set of documents, at least a subset of documents that actually have a definition of deterrence in them in these different categories. And you see a lot of attention goes to means. And I just want to point out that the largest percentages of the Russian literature, and this is just EVP, on deterrence is actually not military conventional or military nuclear, but it's economic, political, and informational. Information is a big one. Because we also code the metadata, we can now also start looking at how do civilians look differently, for instance, at means of deterrence from the civilians. And that's what this one shows. And it's sort of too small to still see what this is about. But you still see here, for instance, the civilians talk mostly about political, economic. In the military literature, also economic is quite high, and the informational bit is quite high. So this is the overall corpus over the whole time. We can also look at this over time. So here it is not, the former one was about the publications. Is it a military publication or is it a non-military? Is it not a military publication? Here we look at the authors, because military authors can also publish in civilian publications. So here you see over time that the military literature or the military authors with a military background writing about deterrence initially talked almost exclusively about nuclear deterrence. And gradually over time, they've started diversifying their portfolio, if you wish to call it that, of priorities or of means that they propose that definitions of deterrence should contain quite significantly. We also looked at definitions of deterrence, and we looked at types of deterrence. So which types of deterrence are dominant in the Russian literature? And here you see, for instance, the relationship between nuclear. So you have your ядерные as the biggest one. And within that same subset, also things like минимальные, ограниченные, ракетно-ядерные. So subset, these are all about nuclear. And the ones on the right are about non-nuclear. We can also break down whether it is a Russian author writing about a Russian concept. That is, it's either they come up with this type themselves, or they cite a Russian author coming up with this type. The other case, of course, is a Russian author that cites a Western author. And even that is interesting for us, right? So which elements from the Western corpus are actually picked up by Russian authors when they try to conceptualize deterrence? The types of work that we're doing is also allowing us to look at changes over time. So here you see what's called racing bar charts. So the top one is ядерные. We're now in 2011. So you see that global and regional deterrence come up quite a bit then. Then the non-nuclear type of deterrence becomes more dominant until about 2015, when it switches back to an overwhelmingly military one. And one of the interesting findings that we have here, and this one was based on the coding that we finished last April, so we're redoing it and it might look differently, but this term realistische sderzhivanie or ustrashenie has come up, so realistic deterrence. Final takeaways are sort of multispectral, right? Think about if we look at, humans can only see so much. You know, we see pixels, we see light, and they get up to our retina, they get into our visual cortex, and that's what we see. We do not see ultraviolet, we do not see infrared, we do not see what X-rays can see. So what we've tried to do is look a little bit beyond what humans would be able to absorb in order to find some key characteristics of the literature, both in terms of the technical aspects and in terms of the substantive aspect. And I think it's fair to say that our evidence shows quite clearly that there are quite a few suboptimal features about how we do this research that may deserve more attention, both from ourselves as the ones who are supplying this knowledge. And so whether we work in an academic setting or in a more applied think tank setting, as many of the presentations that are giving it at this conference are, I really think we should look a harder look at how we do this kind of work and how we would be able to do better. But it's also relevant, of course, for the demand side. So on the policy side, the people who make decisions and read our stuff and try to use our stuff, the people who fund this research, sometimes in government, sometimes philanthropic organizations, wherever they might be, I suspect that they are not fully aware of some of the suboptimal features of this literature. Now, on the bright side, there's an enormous amount of fantastically breakthrough developments with respect to the availability of text, our ability to ingest text into tools, for these tools to process these documents and then ingest it into visualizations that we can try as still human sense makers, that it is not like these things are taking over our job, but they can help us a lot in trying to really have a much bigger, better solution to the recall problem, and then also the processing problem, which is something that we are cognitively have a hard time doing. And so they open up an incredible opportunity for qualitatively different. And some of this is quantitative, but as I already suggested, a lot of it is visualization that you don't have to be a mathematics wizard in order to be able to make sense of it. And our hope is, and I made that point quite clearly in my last presentation, that we could start collaborating more. So rather than looking ourselves up and writing our own piece of article, with just reading some documents, reading some books, trying to build a model in our head and then processing it and ingesting it again as an article, where we could hopefully start working together on some of these data sets and data tools, learn more of them, and not have to wait 2 years before somebody comes up with a new thing, but we could constantly sort of increase our knowledge base as we go along. Now we are sure, and I apologize for being so fast, but we have very little time about this, but so we're sure many of you will probably have questions or will not agree with certain things, have criticisms. And many of you will undoubtedly also disagree with some of the coding decisions we've made, the manual decisions we've made, some of the parameters that we've tweaked in the tools. But the point I want to emphasize for you is that we are willing and able to make all of the uncopyrighted issues, documents out there. We have documented these tools. So if you're unfamiliar with the tools, if you ask us, we will give you access to our knowledge base on how to use site space, where to find bibliometric information, how to gather larger corpora, because we cannot share the EVP and Integram data, for instance. But if you have access to these things, we can show you how to do it yourself. And we're also working a lot on Google Scholar, which is a fantastic resource to make larger corpora publicly available on that. So both on methods and on substance, we really are more than eager, because that's what Carnegie CCNY is really interested in as well. And so we're very eager how our Ru-based platform that we're making on all of this could spawn an hopefully more fertile ecosystem in which a variety of different knowledge providers could actually leverage that platform in their own ways, with a mixture of both collaboration and competition, but hopefully to generate more reliable, more up-to-date, because we can do this real time, and information and knowledge that then our policymakers can also use to hopefully make better decisions. So I'll end with this slide, because it just tries to capture what we're doing. So the maelstrom that you see on the bottom here is essentially us ingesting all of these documents, always updating these things. And we've talked primarily about text here, but we're also doing the same for data. So we're trying to construct much bigger data sets on Russian actual deterrent behavior. And out of that come a number of visualizations that we hope that we together as a discipline can start working with, can start playing with, can start interpreting probably in different ways, in order to generate, still on the top left, the articles and the books that we do today, but hopefully also to move more towards the right, where we get these interactive knowledge, visual knowledge bases that we can explore amongst ourselves as scholars and write about, but that we can also engage with our policymakers on, in order again to improve our field beyond this. 2020 and 2021 were huge years for knowledge building and policy leverage because of COVID-19. Let us all take a look at what COVID-19 has done, and the biomedical field has been doing this for about 10 or 15 years. So the suggestion to do this in this seminar was to mainly show our colleagues some of the things that are out there, and to invite all of you to get back to us if you're interested. And if you do get back to us, we'll be happy to share a lot of this stuff with you. Thanks, Katri and Pentti.
Thank you, Stephan. This was an excellent presentation of how much there is information in the field. But I had to admit that there is a small project within our group with which we try to help our future students to go deep inside to the Russian military thinking and try to gather these different sources at our disposal for their hands. So this might be a good chance for cooperation with you as well. Yeah, thank you. We have some half an hour time for discussion, and may I suggest that there is one question from the audience, which is delivered to all panelists. So sderzhivanie asked, and she's our doctoral student within our university, and she's preparing doctoral dissertation on the topic of Russian sea political interests in the Baltic Sea. And so she's asking, how is it possible to gain balance between Russia not to feeling threatened and Europe showing the willingness to use power? Could you please, from your part, comment on this question?
Oh, for me, it seems to me this is more a question for the person who was talking about fear.
I think, yes, Arash.
I mean, I'd be happy to, but why don't we give him a chance first?
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. It's a good one as well. Yeah, it's always a delicate balancing act. But I think the important thing here is to go beyond, this traditional narrative, that the Russians are aggressive and they are just out there and just evil or whatever, and realize that they have legitimate security interests, just like we do. And there is this common fallacy that we tend to have, like a benign self-image. We will see ourselves as good and the other as inherently bad. And I think that's what's so important about now expanding NATO eastward, because this whole counterfactual that I mentioned is very useful way of thinking, I think, because then we can see ourselves from the other person's or other actors' shoes. And if we feel threatened by NATO, or if we would feel threatened by a Warsaw Pact's expansion, if we would lost the Cold War, then we can imagine that they are not very happy either. So in those kind of situations, I think it's important to not do any unnecessary provocations. And the NATO expansion eastward, I think, is an example of that. But at the same time, I think it's important to put our foot down and just basically make it clear to the Russians that we are not willing to tolerate any kind of behavior. For instance, if they get out of line, the things that you mentioned about disinformation or trying to impact political elections in the West, or if there are any cyber attacks, then we have to put our foot down and say, no, you have gone too far. Then we have to trace them, and then we have to basically punish them, because that's not legitimate way of acting, and there's not a legitimate way of dealing with others at the international level. So I think we need to make a clear distinction. What is a legitimate security interest, and accept that while they go overboard, we have to show willingness to use power. For instance, if they use cyber attacks or they do disinformation campaigns in the West and so on. So we make distinctions here between legitimate and illegitimate behavior.
Can I have a comment on that? Can I? Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I feel distinctly uncomfortable with some of the sweeping generalizations that we sometimes make about these things. And a lot of us are still sort of in the thralls of the isms debate that we've had, right? And then you pick one of the isms and you try to interpret the evidence based on that particular thing. And then you draw policy conclusions. I wonder in which other discipline this would be accepted, where you do not look at it from a number of different angles and not only theoretical, right? Because you should. I mean, this idea that, the role that fear plays in realism, which was well synthesized by Arash, but there's a lot of other perspectives on fear, and not only in political science, but also in a lot of other fields. So you mentioned a part of neuroscience, but there's a lot more work on neuroscience, not only about fear, but about the strategic manipulation of fear for a variety of different purposes. And I sort of referred to that last week. So it seems to me, right, that the right approach to this for us as analysts is to, first of all, start text mining these things for people who have claimed that Russians have fears about certain things, to list those, to then start parsing the evidence. Which of these fears can we relate to actual phenomena that we have observed? How can they be interpreted differently? Like Katri already mentioned, some fears are just political entrepreneurs are essentially and on both sides, by the way, are essentially blowing up some of these fears for reasons of political entrepreneurship. And how do we parse the evidence on that? That's what our task should be. And incidentally, and I forgot to mention that during my presentation, we should be doing this not on our own, but I think our Russian colleagues would play a great role in that. That's why I think it would be great if Finland would play a more proactive role on some of these issues in bringing people together, not about spin, right? Like somebody mentioned before, but around trying to get it right. And right now, us analysts, because we have not done our homework, have often no alternative but to resort to these sweeping claims that are based on partial evidence and on sort of, from my point of view, greatly under-theorized points. So I think it's an important example of really how, if you want to be honest in your recommendations to your, whether it's to your academic audience or to your policy audience, you really have to take a hard look at how much we really know about this. And there is a great gap that I hope we can finally start, bridging a bit.
May I kind of come to this discussion, because originally the question was for Stephan, but I think it might help here as part of this discussion. You mentioned in your presentation that one of the big findings that you have done from the metadata, I call it metadata now, is that the Ukraine is in such a big amount of discussion on deterrence. So that the meaning of this concept for Russian debate on strategic stability is far greater than we have actually appreciated. So this is a question now, how you interpret your finding, because I think it has to do with the discussion that we are now having about how to see the conflict from many perspectives.
Well, look, let me be very clear on this, right? The main reason why it scored so high is because we also had newspaper articles in there. So we looked for things like sderzhivanie and ustrashenie and things around that. But because so the point I'm really trying to make here is that maybe by just looking at theoretical journals and not looking at other forms of information and even knowledge, we may have a distorted view of some of the real epistemic evidence that's out there, both on theories and on the reality. And so I would not, and by the way, Katri, this was not just on the metadata, this is really on the full text, right? So we analyzed the entire text, and I indeed was surprised by the high prevalence of Ukraine in that. But to me, this is sort of a call to look a lot more deeply in that other literature that we don't usually look at, because we think it's too fluffy, right? Or it's just journalists and just the day-to-day kind of things that everybody, that is sexy, but that's not really deep. And I wonder whether we haven't been too callous in our assessment of some of that other stuff, and whether taking some of these other sources more seriously might not help our real understanding, not just of how they think about things, and how they think about things very differently, right? Because to me, that's the main finding so far. How many different views there really are in the Russian discourse. And we, of course, always have an incentive, because our customers ask us, what do the Russians really think? And they don't want to hear that there are 15 different views on that. But if there are, we as analysts should try to make sense of it and try to come out of that. But so I think it's a very interesting finding that sort of shows a potential weakness of the type of research that we do and the sources that we use. And it might encourage us to widen the aperture, the analytical aperture of our efforts.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, now Arash, you please answer yourself to Stephan if you wish.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree with Stephan that we should definitely take in as many perspectives as possible and try to bring in as much data and analyze it as well as we can. But at the same time, I think these kind of theoretical constructs, whether it's realism, fear, or liberalism, or whatever it might be, what kind of isms it might be, are very useful, because the problem today is that we are so overwhelmed with so much data, right? There's so much going on in the world, and we need these kind of tools to make sense of all these data. Otherwise, I think we will just be completely overwhelmed and don't know what to do. So yes, it is important to take different perspectives and data, but I think just getting more and more data is not the solution. We need to have these kind of tools to make sense of this data. Otherwise, I don't think we will be able to act in this very complex world where we are overwhelmed with things. So we need to sometimes also simplify things in order to get to the essence of things and just get rid of the things that are not as important in this context. So I think we need to do both issues.
Yes, thank you.
I think we can continue. Can you, Arash, read the question? Can you see the question from Hanna Ojanen about?
Yes.
I just read it loud. So the about some bit less than 50 spectators in the YouTube channel also can understand what's all about. And the question is from Hanna Ojanen, and she's adjunct professor of our university, and she's asking the question to Arash. One of your lessons learned was more called European cooperation. Could you please elaborate? What type of cooperation in particular, and to what extent can Russian actions be a motivation for European cooperation, given that the fear, if that is the motivation for Russia, seems rather unevenly spread among European countries? Please, Arash.
Yeah, another good question here. And here I was talking mainly about security and military cooperation, of course, because, you know, that's the context of what our discussions here. And you're definitely right that the European motivations differ. You know, Finland is a different strategic position than France is, and so on. But I think that the issue of the United States is something that will affect pretty much all of these Western or European countries. And I think that will give us more incentives to come together, because if China's growth continues and the US starts to pull away from Europe, then we, all the European countries in the region, will have a shared interest in cooperating more in security and military affairs, because then we can't rely on the Americans as much. So I think in this situation, even though the Russian threat or fear of Russia might differ, the simple fact that we can't rely on the US gives us a common base and a common interest to cooperate more with one another. But as I mentioned, unfortunately, things are not necessarily going that direction at the moment, you know, with Brexit and hardline nationalists. So it's even though I think it is in our enlightened interest to cooperate more, I'm not saying that that will actually happen, because, you know, sometimes we make decisions that are, in my opinion, counterproductive. So we can't guarantee that it will happen, but I'm hopeful that it will happen in the future.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We have a short question for Arash. I think what we prepared. We have been discussing about the fear and the motivation and the huge effect on human behavior. So definitely the Russians also know this. So according to your research, can you tell us and if so, how the Russians are playing with this emotional perceptions of fear in its policy, or in security policy, or even in the military policy?
Yeah, I should mention that in my research, I didn't focus on Russia per se. So I looked at realism and how fear is used in realism. In this presentation, I tried to bring in Russia and see how it might play out there, but I haven't done any research pieces in particular on Russia and how they use fear. But from what I've seen in more general terms, there is these two elements, right? There is this real fear about these security threats that are posed by other actors, in Russia's case, mainly from NATO, but also this whole devised fear that you use to further your agenda that Stephan also was talking about. And in this case, it becomes, of course, as we mentioned earlier, hard to distinguish, okay, what is real and what is not. And I think basically we just have to look at the data and see which is the most plausible interpretation we can make on basis of data with the tools that we have. It will be imperfect, but that's our best way of doing this. But I think, for instance, you could see after 9/11, you know, the fear of terrorism that was there. I think in that case, Putin and Russia did definitely exploit that, advance their own interests in the region and trying to frame the subsequent conflict, for instance, in Chechnya, as a part of this. So I think in that case, they definitely used the fear of 9/11 and Islamic terrorism to advance their whole political agenda. But I think in the case of NATO, I think it is quite real and sincere, because I think we would feel the same way if Warsaw Pact was acting that way.
Okay.
Can I make a comment on this as well?
Yes, please.
So, I mean, on the general, the role that fear plays in Russian strategic thinking is, of course, indubitably much higher than it does in ours. And I think that also, that's not even just in international relations, right? That's even in everyday life. I mean, you remember that that Cooper, one of the EU's top people, Robert Cooper, talked about the difference between pre-modern, modern, and postmodern states. Russia is very much a modern state, even sort of older than the United States, which is also very much a modern state, in the sense that they still think that being feared is indeed better than being, respected or being loved or whatever. And that irradiates their entire strategic posture and their strategic behavior. But the question always remains, how do we, more and more postmodern states, deal with that? And I think here, what you see is quite interesting, because you see a wide variety of, like Hannah mentioned, a wide variety of reactions to that. Some of this, backfires and sort of undermines Russian positions. Some of it is interpreted very differently across the European Union, for instance, or across NATO. But to me, that's not a negative thing, that's a positive thing. Because some of the healthy elements of fear that come from the eastern side of the alliance can guard us a little bit against a too easy approach, but also the reverse, right? So the fact that France or Spain or Italy look more southward is also a very healthy balancing act for us Europeans. And ultimately, it seems to me that we should never forget that what this all is about balance of investment. How do so we know that Russia is behaving in a particular way, and I think we should still parse it better and find out more why and how and the dynamics behind that. But from our point of view, is fear something that we should, also try to instill? How much does that cost? That's why I don't think that the sort of military cooperation is the only solution to that. What we really need is a more strategic assessment, a sound strategic assessment of the balance of the advantages and the disadvantages of different options, also in financial terms and also in effectiveness terms. And unfortunately, our field barely does that. We often write something and then we come out and say we should do more of this or we should do less of that. Whereas it seems to me that a real strategic analyst should really list the options, have a couple of criteria against which we can adjudicate which options are more attractive than others, and then we can go to our policymakers. So again, it seems to me there's a whole layer of analysis that's really missing from our debates, and which leads us to very facile policy prescriptions and policy actions, as opposed to doing it the smart way. Let me point out the final point, right? Europe tried to manipulate fear for centuries. Prior to World War II, we tried to, deter our neighbors from invading us. And we found out that there were much smarter ways to secure our countries, to make our people thrive, other than through fear. So I think we should never forget that basic insight, that there are alternatives to fear and the manipulation of fear, and that we should just have a hard-nosed, without being too theoretical or without being too pro or anti whatever, but just put things on, next to each other and do our homework. And I, for one, that's why we sort of went out and got this money to do this sort of stuff more in depth, right? Because I feel we have not, punched at the weight that we could be punching, and I think we can and we should.
Can I just add something to that?
Maybe we try to Could you please, Daivis Petraitis, comment from your perspective, so we can get your view also as part of the discussion, and then Arash, please, and after that.
At first, I have to accept that I am not as good expert in this field as my colleagues who just talked. So I prefer just to leave them to.
Okay, then Arash, please.
Yeah, just this final point about fear. As I mentioned in presentation, you know, the preferred response to fear is restraint rather than aggression. So I think that could be used quite productively if Russia, for instance, is fearful of Western power, then the preferred option would be restraint rather than aggression. And that would, of course, be in Western interest. But at the same time, as I mentioned, we can't like corner them and push them too far, because fear is also compatible with aggression. So it's also there a balancing act. If we push them too far, if NATO goes too far to the east, then we might get aggression on our hand. But if it's more moderate and they still have the option for restraint, they will offer restraint. And I think the case of Georgia with the US military aircraft showed that Putin is actually capable of a restraint in those kind of areas where the West shows resolve.
Thank you. I think we have to change a bit the topic and the direction. And then we have a question for Daivis Petraitis. I think it is twofold. Firstly is for us that how do you see the role of the General Staff Academy within the research establishment of the Ministry of Defense in Russia? And secondly, how did the Prussian art of war, that means the ideas of Moltke the Elder, effect on the Russian art of war during the 1800th century? And there was a definition of in a nutshell, please.
Allow me to start from the second question. Actually, I would like to ask this clarification about this nutshell. But if you talk about Russian art of war in 1800s, so at that time, those ideas were just entering the force. As I mentioned, the Tsar who brought those ideas to Russia was very much concerned with the nobility and with the military being, let's say so, very, very relaxed. At that time, French approach to the military, Napoleonic approach to the war waging was very popular. The genius surrounded by the smart or loyal, the most important loyal officers was waging the wars. So at the 1800s, Russians kept that as the best example. But because, as you know, Napoleon failed, those Prussian ideas started to enter Russian military, especially in the younger ranks. I guess the Russian-Turkish War was the war when Russians finally realized how it is important to do a proper planning, a proper thinking about war waging. But according to my personal understanding, the times when the Prussian ideas got adopted the most started with 1900s, with the First World War, when Russian military suddenly realized how efficient German military could be being surrounded by overwhelming enemies. Later, when Bolsheviks came, they adopted those principles. They moved them not only into the military, all the secret services, all the Communist Party apparatus was operating and appreciated those principles. And of course, Soviet times was when the military did a lot of those things. So, and as I said, if I get a clarification what you mean by this nutshell, I try to elaborate. Now, regarding the General Staff Academy. General Staff Academy is a leading academy in Russian military science. Russia is one of those few countries who have so-called military science academy and system. They are leading in an educational process. They are covering, they are supervising so-called service academies and service military institutions, but at the same time, they do a lot of research. They have institutions and let's say so other research think tanks established, which contribute directly to certain tasks or requests from the General Staff, but at the same time, they are involved in the providing coordination and information to the wider society. For example, while organizing conferences and presenting military estimates on certain issues. You have to be in mind that by Russian military entering wider and wider, what they did, they got a very smart approach. For example, the minister himself is the chairman of the Russian Geographic Association. The chief of Russian Foreign Intelligence Service is the chairman of Russian Historical Association. And those guys are from the military organization. They are familiar with those ideas presented by the General Staff Academy. And the last thing, the General Staff Academy annually holds a big conference. It's partially open for the outsiders and partially closed. So they are participating in the country's educational system, and they have quite a big impact, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very interesting. I would have one question, actually two questions to Stephan. So one is from Kristin, asking about the concrete plans for making publicly available your data sets. And then I had a question on your data, actual data. So at the one point there was a you mentioned that the Russian debate focuses on means, and there are these different informational, there's a lot of discussion on the informational means and other means, etc. So do you have an explanation for this? And I would suggest that could it be that one part of the explanation is that Russian debate on deterrence, or in general the strategic thinking, is not that super theoretical as perhaps the Western discussion is, or is this just my kind of experience with the Russian theories and the articles? So two questions. Thanks.
Okay, so on Kristen, I already wrote something in the chat as well, but essentially our plan is to make everything we can make available, so that's not copyrighted, available broadly in the second half of this year, probably. But in the meanwhile, anybody who reaches out to us already now, so what we have, just to sort of tell people a little bit what that is, right? So we have quite detailed descriptions about the tools. Like if you want to do bibliometrics on our topic or on this topic, we'll show you where to find it, what tools there are, the pros and cons of these tools, and we'll show you examples of how we have used them so far. And so all that stuff, like for instance, on bibliometrics, we already have. We are constantly restructuring this stuff, but we are very eager to stress test our current documentation by having people use it, right? We will also publish our own stuff about this, right? But we would be extremely eager if somebody else would step in and do something themselves, and hopefully in an open way, right? So not taking the stuff, locking themselves up somewhere for a year and a half, and then sort of publishing something, but really do it on the sort of fly. So especially to all of you, if you have any young PhD students or postdocs or even junior faculty, I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that we will be seeing a lot more of this. And we can either do it very slowly or we can try to expedite it, right? So we are fortunate in that we have some money now to do this money for ourselves. We can't pay other ones, but we can actually keep building documentation. So if you know any of these people, please have them reach out to us. We would be most eager for people who are still trying to find topics, right? Because they would then have access to more information, more things. They could work with us on this, and they could still write their own dissertations and stuff. So that's on the documentation. So please, practically, if you're interested, reach out to us. I mean, I'm easy to find on internet. Now, on your question, Katri, I mean, I don't have the answer to this either, right? I realize that, just like, to pick up a little bit on the discussion we had before, I mean, a lot of Russia thinking is still very modern, right? So even the structure of the general staff, even some of these structural issues still sort of reflect the way in which Western European countries thought at the beginning of the industrial age. And that is Clausewitz and Jomini on the planning side. That is these sort of general staffs and Ministry of the Defense in a sort of very linear way on the government side. And so the Soviet Union had a huge time, even though Agarkov and others came up with the idea of network-centric warfare in some sense, right? They did not have the sort of wherewithal to leverage that. And I think the same of that is happening now. So I think a lot of that, what we see in the Russian literature is a reflection of what they read in the West. They, of course, have made some progress, but they're still way behind on the civilian side on almost everything. So I feel like we're sort of in a similar situation as in the late 80s, or even early 80s until like the 90s, where they sort of heard something, they tried to play with it. They also tried to emulate some of our stuff, right? So I found it interesting that the general staff people then get sent to civilian jobs to basically enhance their training. But it's still a very bureaucratic way of doing that, right? The one country that I respect most on this is actually Singapore, who have like these military scholars who are real scholars, you know, and in their careers, they will also go to other sides. So I think there are more advanced ways of doing what Russia is trying to do now. But look, to answer your question, if anybody's interested in that, if you're interested in that, Katri, look at our stuff and try to figure out what's behind that, right? How do they respond to these things? This can all be empirically investigated in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do up until even a few years ago. So there again, please reach out, and we'll make sure that you can get access to whatever would be of use to you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you all the speakers, and I would like to ask you to say some words or sentences in the end of this panel discussion, please. Arash, begin.
I just want to thank you all for coming and for all your great questions and discussions. It's been very helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you for organizing this great event at the Finnish National Defense University.
Thank you, Arash. We are happy to have you. Stephan, please.
Sure. I mean, deterrence is back with a vengeance, right? In every national debate across the Western Alliance, it's back. My personal, pretty well documented feeling now on this is that we miss an important part of what we would need to be able to make judicious and good value for money decisions on some of these big issues. A lot of the costs involved in trying to ensure deterrence, both financial, but also in other ways, are very high. And so I would certainly not be the one who says that, we should get rid of deterrence, but I do think we should take a much harder look at the alternative of deterrence. Why do we have deterrence theory and not like, a seduction theory in international security, or strategic timing? There's so much stuff that we're missing here, both at the deterrence level and at the higher level, where I think we'd be doing some more work. And again, I mean, the plea I've already made a couple of times, we really can do better on this. We had excuses for a long time not to do this stuff. We could not read everything. We still cannot read everything. But now things are changing quite dramatically, and I feel frustrated that we have not been able to jump on this more quickly. So the combination of the increased importance of deterrence, the lack of knowledge of that we still have on some aspects of it, and the increased opportunity for also collaborative knowledge building on this really lead to a unique opportunity, I think, to get our act together.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
At first, I would like to thank you organizers for allowing me to speak in this seminar. Understand that my topic was slightly different because I was following the old Oriental wisdom said by Sun Tzu, if you know the enemy, you will win all the battles. So I was concentrating more, of course, on Russia, and I do appreciate everyone listening and asking the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
For us, and we have a break now, and we will continue at 6 p.m. in Helsinki time. And then there will be Michael Kofman and Clint speaking about a Kharkov period and the Russian views of correlation of forces in the very evening tonight.
Okay, see you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.